Good afternoon. Welcome to APA's monthly webinar series. My name is Billy Zydick, Standards and Codes Administrator for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being co-presented by APA and the International Safety Equipment Association, ISEA. The recording will be posted on our webinar page later this afternoon. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned out through December and are open for registration. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by the presenters. AIA and professional continuing education credits are being offered. Please send me an email at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org to request a certificate if you did not indicate you wanted one when you registered. Also, if you have more than one person attending the session from a central location, please contact me so everyone gets credit for attending. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn this over to Christine Fargo, Vice President, Operations and Technical Services, ISEA, who will be your moderator for this afternoon. Take it away, Christine.
Great. Thank you, Billy. Good afternoon, everyone. And we'd like to thank APA and the rest of the entities for including ISEA in your educational offerings today. And if you'll bear with me because bear with me for one moment. I don't seem to be able to forward. There we go. Thank you. My apologies. As Billy mentioned, my name is Christine Fargo. I'm the Vice President of Operations and Technical Services at the International Safety Equipment Association. Today we have two presenters who are well-versed in providing guidance and expertise in applying the principles of the ANSI ISEA Z358 standard to various working environments, especially those engaged in academic and educational settings. First, I'd like to introduce you to Mike Adkins, who's the Regional Sales Manager for Guardian Equipment. Mike has been in the emergency fixtures industry for more than 25 years and is currently the Vice Chairman of the ISEA Emergency Eyewash and Shower Group. He's joined by the group's Chairman, Ryan Fund. Ryan is the Senior Product Manager at Bradley Corporation. With nearly 20 years of experience, he oversees the emergency drench shower, eyewash, and thermostatic mixing valve portfolios for the company. Both gentlemen have been involved in the development of several iterations of the industry standard, and I'm pleased to have them here with us today. Today's session, as noted earlier, has been approved for AIA CES continuing education credits. For AIA members, credits will be reported to the CES records. Non-AIA members may receive certificates of completion upon request. It is noted, as always, that content provided today should not be construed as an endorsement or approval by AIA as it relates to materials, construction, any method or manner of handling, using, distributing, or dealing with any material or product. And any questions that you may have on these will be addressed at the conclusion of this presentation. Just a real quick overview of our objectives for today's webinar. First is to emphasize the drivers and importance of providing adequate emergency flushing fixtures to your employees. We're also going to talk about the relationship between OSHA and other authorities having jurisdiction in your workspace where corrosive materials or emergency fixtures are needed, and how the industry consensus standard applies and integrates with those obligations. Then we'll go into the specifics of the standard itself, drawing particular attention to those aspects that impact you as responsible parties, either as EHS leads for your employers, whether you're building and facilities maintenance engineers, or you have other compliance obligations. Briefly, I'd like to share a little bit about ISEA. We are a national trade association representing manufacturers, distributors, and testing laboratories of safety equipment and technologies. This includes all head-to-toe PPE and includes safety equipment such as instrumentation, first aid kits, facility signage, and of course, emergency eye wash and shower equipment. Our corporate members represent more than 100 brands of equipment and range from large multinational companies offering a wide portfolio of products to family-owned companies who offer a single product and are leaders in that particular space. In addition, we are an accredited standards developing organization. As such, we are responsible for managing the standards process for key PPE and key PPE standards to include the development, revision, and interpretation of those industry standards. ANSI itself does not write standards. They empower organizations to work under a prescribed set of development rules, and those are the rules that we adhere to. As noted, and as an accredited standards organization, you're probably familiar with some of the more widely known documents that we write, including eye and face protection or first aid kits. Many of the standards that ISEA writes are codified into regulation. They may be referenced into other industry standards or are recognized as best practices when designing programs to help workers. I'd like to now turn it over to Mike, who will talk about why this equipment is so critical in working environments. So Mike, hit it.
Good morning from West Coast and good afternoon to the East Coast. My pleasure to be here with you today. And I hope that we all learn something from this exchange. So basically, I'm going to start out with a poll. I'm the polling guy. We have 2 poll questions that I'll be offering up. And the first one is, how do you learn? Do you learn or are educated regarding shower and eye wash requirements? And the potential answers are industry publications, in-house safety experts, equipment manufacturers, sales representatives, consultants, or I don't know much about the requirements, and perhaps this is your first foray into this subject today. So please give us your answer, and Billy's going to be gathering that information. We're going to give you the results of the poll here in just a bit. Okay, these are the poll results. In-house safety experts. So I know many of you are, I believe, the environmental health and safety directors or associated with that department at your institution. So that's wonderful. Glad to have you on board today. And industry publications and equipment representatives. And then we have some people that are here maybe to take a deeper dive in about the eye wash and shower requirements. So great. We hope that you'll be satisfied with the information you received today. So
yeah, oops. This is not working well for me.
Oh, there we go. Great. All right. Yeah. Sorry about the delay there, everyone. Okay. So basically, we have some statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and which is the federal government. And in 2014, there were over 13,000 chemical exposures in the workplace in the United States, and over 46,000 workers were exposed to harmful substances or environments. Over 23,000 workers suffered eye injuries, and the direct initial cost of these workplace injuries was $39,000. And then also even more sobering, if you want to get a bigger picture of this, is the fatalities in the workplace. In 2016, there were over 5,000 fatalities due to work-related injuries in the United States. And some places where you will find emergency eye wash and showers, or we should find them, is in machining shops, for example, manufacturing, chemical storage and or chemical manufacturing. examples to petrochemical. Also, more routinely, if you will, in custodial closets, janitor's closets, where not only cleaning fluids are stored, but also they're stored in concentrated levels and then are diluted in that storage facility. And so that presents a greater risk to those who are involved with those chemicals. In the laundry facilities, bleaches are used in laundry, so bleach is corrosive. Then also in laboratories, and so your science labs that you have there, your places of learning, the science classrooms, pharmaceutical manufacturing, pharmaceutical research, etc. Many, many different applications. So in 1970, Occupational Safety Health Administration was formed and by the federal government, and stated, pertaining to our topic today, there's a statement in there, it's very broad in general, where the eyes or body of any person may be exposed to injurious corrosive materials, suitable facilities for quick drenching or flushing of the eyes and body shall be provided within the work area for immediate emergency use. So this basically was a very general statement, and basically left the door open for a standard, and that's what we're going to be talking about later on here, and we'll give you more information about the standard that was formed. So other regulatory outreach, if you will, there is in OSHA, there's the mention of referenced eyewash in showers in several different locations in the Code of Federal Regulations 29, 1910, and formaldehyde is one, powered industrial trucks, pulp paper mills, telecommunications, dipping and coating operations, electrical power generation, medical first aid, and hygiene protection are some sections that you would find references to eyewash in showers, and that's in the federal OSHA. Then there's other U.S. Department of Energy Standard, Joint Commission. And then for new facilities on your campuses that are plan checked and are permitted, then they need to be go through the scrutiny of your state and local building codes. The two main plumbing codes in the United States are the International Plumbing Code and the Uniform Plumbing Code, and both codes require adherence to the ANSI Z358.1, and so therefore it's through that channel, if you will, codes building, there's enforcement of the standard. So the most current version of the ANSI standard, there's been several versions over the years. The first version was 1981, and currently it's 2014 is the current standard. So another poll question, is the ANSI ISEA Z358.1 a federal OSHA regulation? Please respond. Well, just to let you know that the ANSI standard is not a federal regulation. The standard, OSHA does not necessarily, federal OSHA does not state that. However, in your states, the state of California, state of Washington, state of Utah, for example, do enforce the ANSI standard. They do sometimes have exceptions to the standard, but basically they use the standard for compliance and facilities. So that's how the standard is enforced, but federal OSHA, which was the question, is not enforced by federal OSHA. But it is referenced in some of their documentation and correspondence, as it states here. Industry consensus standard approved by ANSI, developed by recognized industry organization, ISEA, and Christine explained who the ISEA is, and input from stakeholder companies and organizations such as universities. So perhaps your university, if you choose to want to be involved in helping us formulate the standard, then please contact Christine. Routinely updated. Right now, we've been in the last decade or so, a couple decades, I think it's been a 5-year update cycle. Recognized by multiple state occupational safety health. I mentioned that earlier. There's some new states, for example. Means of complying with federal OSHA regulations. And again, getting back to federal OSHA does reference the standard in their interpretations, but officially in the Code of Federal Regulations, the ANSI standard is not cited to be for compliance. So equipment types addressed in the ANSI standard, Z358.1, 2014, emergency showers, emergency eye washes, emergency eye face wash equipment. Ryan will explain the differences between the two in more detail. Combination units being the combination shower and eye wash or eye face wash. Supplemental equipment, which by definition doesn't give the full gallons per minute, full flow, or even the 15-minute required time for washing. But they are available for basically point of use, such personal wash units, drench hoses. Personal wash unit would be squeeze bottles, drench hoses with one nozzle on it. And Ryan will get more into that here shortly. Key areas addressed in the standard, flow rates and duration, patterns, the spray patterns of the showers, of the eye wash heads, the valve operation is prescribed also in the standard. Product certification, this is third-party certification done by a third-party laboratory that certifies each manufacturer's product to make sure that it is performing per the ANSI standard and to meet all of these state OSHA requirements and the building codes in the states. Installation instructions, installation actually is addressed in the standard, and maintenance and training. And also, I know many of the universities require commissioning by the installers to test the eye wash and or shower to make sure that they meet the ANSI standard before turning the facility over to you. So the first performance criteria that I'll address, and then Ryan will pick the others, is the 15-minute continuous flushing. Due to medical evidence that residual chemicals on body require extended flushing to ensure the removal. And for some, I know they feel this is a long period of time, and it is in that situation, particularly the eyes. However, in my experience meeting with medical professionals, one instance, urgent care nurse said that most common time that they flush people's eyes when they get to urgent care is 30 minutes. I think that's indicative because of the fact that they weren't able to receive first aid at the site, and there was not an Eyewash available. And another situation, at University of Washington professor toxology for the state of Washington stated, Tom Martin, that that they will irrigate patients' eyes up to 24 hours because the cornea can be transplanted, but the retina cannot be. And so in those situations when the eye loss may be imminent, they will try to irrigate for 24 hours to save the eyesight.
Okay, I think this is where I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to continue our review of the ANSI Z358.1 standard and really start to look at more of the specific performance requirements that are within the standard, and then some of the requirements for facility owners, because the standard really is intended to address both of those areas. What are the performance requirements that a manufacturer may need to provide products to, and then what are the expectations of the facility owner when that is installed. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the flow rates, and the flow rates will vary depending upon the type of equipment that you're installing. It's also important to note that these are minimum flow rates, so this is the least amount of water that you can expect to come out of the product and still be compliant. A lot of times what you'll find with plumbed units is you will be a little bit more than that, so they're not just on the edge of that threshold. If you're irrigating the eyes, if the product is simply being used as an eye wash only, the minimum flow rate is 0.4 gallons per minute. If you're irrigating the entire face with drenching water, the minimum flow rate is going to be 3 gallons per minute. And then if it's a body wash or a drench shower, the minimum flow rate is 20 gallons a minute. All of these are considered or tested at a 30 pounds of pressure on the inlet of the fixture. And I want to point out that the 20 gallons a minute is really a lot of water. I mean, not always do we think about that number, but to put a little context around that, the shower in your house probably has some sort of a flow restrictor in it, and then generally that flow restrictor is right around 2 gallons per minute. So you can just imagine that these drench showers are flowing water at 10 times the amount of what you receive from your shower when you are cleaning up in the morning or at the end of the day. And then as a manufacturer, we're providing these products to meet those minimum requirements and getting the product certified at that requirement of 30 pounds of pressure. So when it goes through that testing procedure, the agency needs to ensure that it works down to that 30 pounds of pressure requirement. Also important to note is when you get into combination units, you're adding a drench shower and an eye face wash together, and the standard requires that both of those be operable at the same time. So now you have a combined flow situation, and at a minimum, if you have a drench shower and an eye face wash, that combined flow rate is going to be 23 gallons a minute. And that becomes important when you're evaluating the product and testing it, because you have to make sure that the flow rate is sufficient when both of those things are going. So you're not that the drench shower is starving all the water from the eye wash, okay? So that still needs to be available when both are being used simultaneously. The standard also talks about spray patterns, and this will cover spray patterns for drench showers and spray patterns for eye face wash. In regards to an emergency shower, the spray pattern or the flushing fluid must be at least 20 inches wide at 60 inches above the finished floor. The standard also states that the drench pattern must be substantially dispersed throughout that cone or that spray pattern that's coming off of that shower head there. And this is written that way to try to effectively wash the user during an event. So you want to cover as much of that user as possible so that they can quickly and efficiently rinse those chemicals or their agents off of the body. And as I mentioned, for a combination unit, this has to be achieved with both the drench shower and the eye face wash going at the same time, so that pattern needs to be present for a combination unit when both are going at the same time. In regards to an eye or an eye face wash, we actually have a test gauge that's been developed. And this is a tool that manufacturers use when developing products, certifying bodies will use when certifying products, and then of course facilities can use when they're testing their products that are already installed. So what you have is a little rectangular gauge, and it has two circles in the center, and those represent the average eyes of a human being. And so then the gauge is placed in the water streams and to ensure that you're actually covering the eyes in the right or proper manner. So when that test gauge is placed in the water streams, the water must cover both of the circles at some point that is less than 8 inches from the bottom or the nozzles that are supplying the eye wash fluid. And when tested in a combination unit, this should also be done when the drench shower is running at the same time. So you don't have a situation where the drench shower is starving all the water and you don't get anything from the eye wash in that circumstance. And then all of the spray pattern heights, again, are measured from the floor. And so for an eye wash, it needs to be between 33 and 53 inches from the floor. Now, these gauges are readily available. I know all of the manufacturers have these available. So if you are in need of one, you can contact any of the manufacturers of this safety equipment, and they will be able to provide these test gauges to you so you can continuously inspect your products that are in your facilities. The standard also talks about the temperature of the water. And so just as important as the spray patterns and the flow rates, temperature of the water has also been deemed to be an important requirement. When the standard was first developed, it wasn't in there, but it was soon recognized as the association talked about how we can improve the standard, that the temperature of the water has a great influence on how long someone actually stays in the flushing fluid. So it was eventually put into the appendix of the standard, and then eventually after more discussion, moved to the main body of the standard. So it's an enforceable component of the Z358.1 standard now. So, and I want to give you a little background on this. You can imagine if you're going back to that shower situation in your home, I don't know how many of you feel comfortable showering in 50-degree water for 15 minutes. I'm guessing that not many of you do. So I doubt you would want to stay in there for that period of time. And now consider that the majority of the U.S. groundwater is somewhere between 40 and 60 degrees. You know, unless you live in that really warm states like Arizona or Florida or Texas, you're probably getting your groundwater at a temperature that's less than 60 degrees. So if our goal is to ensure that a person stays in that water for 15 minutes, it's important that that temperature be conducive to allow them to do that. And so that really what led to the tepid water requirement. And in the standard, the tepid water range is defined as 60 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason for that range, well, water below 60 degrees is known to cause hypothermia when the body is exposed to it for too long of a period of time. So obviously you don't want to stick someone underneath a drench shower and have their body temperature drop, and now you're introducing a new problem to them. And then of course, quite honestly, if the water temperature is too cold, most people are going to get out before the 15 minutes is up. On the other side of the range, water over 100 degrees could of course become scalding, but also importantly, some chemicals will react in an enhanced manner when flushed with water over 100 degrees. So you don't want to make that problem worse as well. So you really need to be somewhere within that range of 60 to 100 degrees. If you are in a warm weather state and your water is stored at a temperature above 100 degrees, you will need to consider some sort of a chiller option to actually cool it down. Okay. Now, there are a lot of different methods out there to achieve tepid water. The standard doesn't dictate which method you use, so it's entirely up to each facility how they want to deliver that tepid water. But I'm going to go over a few of the more common solutions that are out there so you get an idea of what these would be. So the first one is a thermostatic mixing valve, and that's a device that's going to make use of the hot water supply available in the building and the cold water supply available in the building. It'll take those two temperatures and it'll blend it to a consistent tepid water temperature, and it'll hold that temperature constant even if the incoming temperatures or pressures change at the valve. The valves are sized based on the application, so a smaller device will be suitable for an Eyewash, a medium-sized device for a drench shower, and a larger valve for a full combination unit. There is a standard that governs emergency valves for thermostatic valves for emergency applications, and that standard is ASSE 1071. A big part of that standard is a provision to provide cold water when the hot water runs out. So the idea there is that cold water is better than no water at all. So if there is an instance where your hot water supply were to run short, or someone were to accidentally or cut off the supply of hot water to the mixing valve, cold water still continues to flow through that valve at all times. I also want to point out that it's important not to use the wrong valve for the application. A typical thermostatic mixing valve that would be at a point of use, like under a faucet in a restroom or in a building mechanical room that's dispersing water throughout the entire building, it's designed differently than a valve for an emergency fixture application. And so those point of use valves, those hot water distribution valves, they actually will shut off the flow of cold water if the hot water fails, and they'll shut off the flow of hot water if the cold water fails. Obviously, if you're in a safety shower, a situation, you can't have an instance where cold water isn't available if the hot water shuts off. So that's why those valves are designed differently, and that's why I encourage you to ensure that you always have the correct valve, an emergency valve, for an Eyewash or drench shower application. The other types of tepid water equipment you'll find are electric tankless water heaters. These are devices that only require cold water and power. So now if you don't have hot water available, you can still provide tepid water by tapping into the cold water source, and it'll heat the water on demand for the application. The devices have electrical safety features in them to ensure the water will not become scalding, and they will also provide cold water if the power is lost. Sizing these devices is always based on the total flow rate that's required and the coldest groundwater temperature, as that has an impact in terms of how much power you need for the unit. And then the last type of method you could use is just a heated storage tank. So in this case, you have a large vessel that can hold sufficient water for the full 15-minute requirement of the standard, and that water is typically heated to a tepid water temperature with some sort of an immersion heater, and then when called upon, the water is just delivered directly to the Eyewash or drench shower from that tank. The standard also talks about performance criteria as it pertains to valves, and it actually does this specifically for valves that are on the fixture, but also talks about any valves leading up to the fixture as well. And so I'm going to kind of touch on both of those. So first of all, any valves that are on an Eyewash or a drench shower need to be very simple to operate. So it can't be a complex, multiple motion type of situation to turn on an Eyewash or a drench shower. The activation must occur in 1 second or less. So as soon as you activate, pull a handle or pull a push rod or a handle or anything like that, the water should come on in 1 second or less. Once you activate the unit, it must stay open by itself. So it should not be one of those spring-loaded devices where it automatically turns itself off. And this is so that you have the ability to hold your eyes open. So if you need to irrigate your eyes, the standard wants you to be able to have two hands free to hold your eyelids open and flush the contaminants out. Similarly, if you get some sort of chemical agent on your clothing, it could be soaking through and eventually being absorbed into the skin. And so you have to have two hands available to remove any articles of clothing that may be contaminated by the hazard as well. So it is important to have that product stay open once it's been activated. Some of the common activations you'll find for valves are paddles, pull-down rods, squeeze handles on drench showers, or simply a swinging motion of a product that is sitting over a deck where it swings over a sink or a bowl and activates automatically. The other type of valve to be aware of is any supply valves that are feeding the fixture. So if there are any ball valves in line prior to an eye wash or a drench shower, they may be there for service reasons, the standard does require that those devices can be locked in the open position. You don't want a situation where someone accidentally shuts off the water to an eye wash or drench shower and the people don't realize it, and when they go to activate the eye wash or drench shower, nothing comes out. So if you do have any ball valves in line for service, please make sure that they are the lockable type, and you do use some lockout takeout procedures to ensure that they are set in the proper orientation to always be able to deliver water to the eye wash or drench shower at all times. Okay. The standard also talks about certification, and so as a manufacturer, they're going to obtain a third-party certification on all of these products. And in this way, it's not the manufacturer that's saying, yeah, of course, my product complies with the standard. It's actually an independent agency that has done a full evaluation of the product per the ANSI Z358.1 standard and make sure that it actually meets all of the criteria therein. And so that performance evaluation is going to look at all those things we talked about. It's going to look at the flow rate. It's going to look at the flushing fluid pattern. It's going to look at the activation and any other manufacturer performance criteria in the standard. And it's going to then provide a verification that, yes, this passes that requirement. So I always encourage then that you ensure that the product you're purchasing has that third-party certification. Some of the common ones that you will find on products are CSA, SCI, which is Safety Equipment Institute, UL, or IAPMO. So any of those are some of the more common ones you'll find that certify products. Now, supplemental equipment is also touched on in the standard. Supplemental equipment could be those personal wash units, or it could be drench hoses. These devices would support compliant products, but it would not replace the need for these products. So bottled eye wash is a good example of this. Bottled eye wash is a great device to provide an immediate relief if you get some sort of contaminant in your eyes, but they're not large enough to provide a full 15-minute rinse. They don't support a hands-free operation, and you can really only rinse one eye at a time with these. So it does not replace the need for a fully compliant eye wash product. Supplemental drench hoses are also a device that can be considered, as they can allow you to target a specific area of the body. But again, these devices won't be able to encourage a full hands-free operation, and they can't drench the entire body like a drench shower would. So these products can supplement the use, but will not replace the need for a full 15-minute compliant product. The standard then gets into some of the requirements of an installer, and so I'm going to cover some of those next. The first is the installation or the placement of the equipment. So in this case, most manufacturers will provide guidance in their installation instructions on these factors, but it is important to understand as the facility owner what you need to follow in placing this equipment. So drench shower heads must be between 82 and 96 inches off the finished floor, and those eye wash streams need to be between 33 and 53 inches off of the finished floor. So be cognizant of this when you're placing products onto walls or into ceilings or onto countertops that you're hitting these requirements of the standard. Anytime you have a combination unit or a pedestal or floor mounted unit, the manufacturer probably has these built into the design, but if not, you need to pay attention to those so that the unit's not too high up into the ceiling or too high up on a counter or a wall. You also need to be aware of the surroundings. So the flushing fluid that's delivered to the eye wash, first and foremost, needs to be potable. So it needs to be from a suitable for drinking source. The safety equipment needs to be close to the hazard. So basically 10 seconds is what the standard requires in terms of a distance from the hazard, which equates to about 55 feet. That's the reasonable distance an average person can cover in 10 seconds. It needs to be in a well-lit area. There needs to be visible signage to identify the equipment, and it needs to be located on the same level. So you can't have to go up and down a set of stairs in order to get from where the hazard is to where the safety equipment is. Also be aware of any obstructions that are on the way, like boxes or garbage cans or things like that, because you don't need to have a person try to clear those pieces of boxes or things out of the way before they can actually get to the safety equipment. You also don't want to have the employee run a maze to get there, and they should not have to go through a doorway either. Now, I am going to point out a couple of things from the appendix of the standard to be aware of. In the appendix, it does allow a single step up from the floor onto a platform or an enclosed device, a closed safety fixture device. And it also allows for a doorway if the door opens in the direction of travel. So you can't have to pull the door towards you. It should push or move in the direction of travel or going with you. The standard then gets into some maintenance and training elements as well. So first and foremost, always make sure you follow any maintenance or inspection requirements that are provided from the manufacturer. So please do read those installation instructions. The standard requires that all plumbed eyewash and drench showers are activated weekly. This is done to flush the line from any debris or sediment that's building up in the dead leg. So you're really trying to flush out the dead leg portion of the device. It's not intended for you to have to run the unit for a full 15 minutes. It is just a shorter test. So you're ensuring functionality and clearing those lines. You should also document any of this testing for record keeping. And inspection tags are provided with safety fixtures for this purpose. And that way you have a record that the product has been tested on a weekly basis should anyone need to see that. Now, self-contained products are to be inspected visually instead of actually activated. They can just have a visual inspection, but always refer to any special manufacturer's instructions that may come with that, so you are following that properly. Another important thing to be aware of is employees need to be properly trained on this equipment. They need to know where the product is located, how the product is used. So you should actually walk through that process. Here's what you would do to get to the product. Here's what you would do to activate the product, and then reinforce this on a regular basis. In a panicking situation, an employee may just think, oh my gosh, I got to run to the restroom and wash this stuff off of me, when the safety equipment is much closer than the restroom is. So make sure that that's kind of ingrained in them so that they are making use of that equipment. Also, it's important to train the employees on what to do if one of their coworkers has to use one of these products, okay? They should need to know that they need to call for EMT assistance. They should be present, someone should be present with that person who is using the safety equipment so they can start doing a time of the event so the person knows how long they're actually in those water streams. It's amazing, you know, in that type of situation, you lose track of time very easily. So you need someone actually timing that event. And then, of course, to coach them on anything they need to do about if there's chemicals on a certain part of their body or if they realize there's something on an article of clothing that needs to be removed. Okay, so that should be all part of the training process. There is an annual inspection that's required in the standard, and this is a more full evaluation of the product to make sure that it complies with all elements of the standard and it's going to deliver water for that 15 minutes. At this time, it's also a good idea to look carefully for any changes in the work environment that may impact the safety equipment as well. And then just make sure that this product is still meeting the needs of the hazard that's present in the work area. And then I'm going to cover a few things that are not really addressed in the standard, so you're aware of these as well. So the standard doesn't tell you exactly which equipment you need for the hazard. You really want to review a safety data sheet to help direct you with that. So those types of documents will tell you, based upon this chemical hazard, you need to flush your eyes thoroughly for 15 minutes, or you need to rinse your body thoroughly for 15 minutes if exposed to the skin or the eyes. So look for that type of help when trying to determine what type of equipment you need. The standard also doesn't cover drainage of the water or containment of the water. And so be aware that the facility needs to try to collect or drain this water as it's been dispersed from the eyewash or the drench shower. And that combination unit, again, is going to flow 23 gallons a minute for 15 minutes. You're talking about 350 gallons of water for a full 15-minute period of time. So do think about where that water is going to go, how it's going to be drained. If it needs to be contained because of the contaminant is so harsh that you can't reintroduce it into a gray water or a groundwater system. So that's really going to be dependent on site and any local like environmental protection agencies that may have some jurisdiction in that regard. Also be aware that alarms or signaling systems are not required of the standard, but it is a good thing to consider as well. Alarms are important in remote locations of the facility, outdoor operations where there's not a lot of other people present, or in situations where vandalism might be a concern. So an alarm is a good way to send a notification to anybody in the area or remotely, because they can be tied into building management system, that an event is occurring and they need to get help there as soon as possible. The standard also does not have any provisions for ADA compliance, so always review local accessibility regulations in your area that may impact that. Now, manufacturers will design products that are generally referred to as barrier-free, and they look at elements of the ADA standard, such as, you know, what are the height and reach requirements in drinking fountains and laboratories, and apply that to the product. So just kind of be aware of that when you're doing your design to ensure that if you do have to accommodate disabled people, that you are selecting products that take that into consideration. And then lastly, there are a few other resources that are out there that you can look at beyond just the ANSI standard that we talked about today. So those safety data sheets would be one element that you can use to reference in terms of what chemicals are in your hazard and how you need to protect or treat employees that are exposed to those chemicals. You can consult the NIOSH Pocket Guide to Chemicals, which has a lot of wealth of information on that as well. And then lastly, ISEA has a use and selection guide on their website. And the guide goes into a lot of different details on the types of products and a lot of important things to know when selecting eyewash or drench showers for your facilities. So with that, we can turn it over to any questions that you may have, and we'll do our best to try to answer them between Mike and myself.
Okay, our first question we have for our presenters, are these plumbed into standard cold water?
You would not necessarily want to plumb them just into straight cold water. You would want to make sure that the water is tepid. Okay, so that's the distinction I'm going to make. If your supply of water can remain tepid in that 60 to 100 degree range for 15 minutes, then you don't necessarily need to have another device to support that. But if not, then do look at one of those other solutions out there that can provide that tepid water. You have anything to add, Mike?
Go ahead, Mike.
That was Ryan.
Okay.
You want me to make a response? One thing that
you have anything to add?
As Brian mentioned earlier, 60 degrees is awfully cool for a 15-minute period. And so many, even in Southern California, we have facilities that have tempering systems because the owner wants to maintain an 80-degree temperature throughout the whole system to provide water to the eyewash and showers. So it depends as what the EH&S dictates and what the optimal temperature should be. And so that range 60 to 100, we need to stay within that, but it may require a different temperature at your facility, and that can be achieved through the means that Ryan already discussed.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add to that is, a lot of times your building it's warm to a certain room temperature, right? And so there's a thinking that the piping is all to that room temperature as well. And that's fine and true for the initial part of that 15 minutes, but when you're talking about a drench shower and that minimum of 23 gallons a minute, eventually all that water that's in that ambient range is going to be flushed out, and cold water is coming behind it, okay? So you do want to make sure that the person has the ability to stay in there for the full 15 minutes.
Okay. Our next question, is there any concern about the quality of water coming to eyewash units? Meaning, are Are filters needed in some regions if the testing shows high levels of some chemicals, etc.?
I guess
Ryan, I'll defer to you on that. I'm not familiar with any filtration systems. But.
Yeah, so I guess what I can say is that you need to ensure that the water is potable, and the standard defines potable as suitable for drinking. Okay, so if the water in your supply is not potable, is not suitable for drinking, you will need to provide some sort of filtration before it gets to the Eyewash or drench shower. Now, I don't have any recommendations. The standard doesn't have any recommendations on the exact type of filtration, and I'm sure that will depend upon what you all need to filter out. But be aware of that requirement for potable water and ensure that you are, providing that to the fixture.
I'll just mention that the standard also, the flushing fluid, we refer to the flushing fluid, and maybe many of you are thinking, why don't you just say water? Well, there are other fluids that are acceptable for the standard. Potable water is mentioned, preserved water, preserved buffered saline solution, or other medically acceptable solution manufactured and labeled in accordance with applicable government regulations. And those are normally referring to self-contained eye washes or squeeze bottles. I just wanted to clarify what flushing fluid means.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike.
Okay, our next question is, are eye wash stations required inside of custodial closets?
I think we kind of demonstrated that with one of the slides, and the point of having concentrated cleaning chemicals typically are stored in those locations. I know there's other delivery devices that they have now that I think maybe dilute the chemicals internally and such. But just the fact that even the diluted chemicals could be possibly injurious, that it is typical, in new facilities today, the buildings do come equipped with the eye washes inside of the where those chemicals are stored, typically at custodial. Billy, what was the location specifically to mention in the question?
Custodial closets.
Custodial, right. Custodial facilities, normally in that custodial closet, eye washes are located there. That's very typical. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, I think most of your custodial people are not accustomed to wearing eye protection, right? They're not thinking about that. And so they don't even have that first level of PPE that's going to protect them if there is a splash as they're mixing some substances together. So can be even more important in that regard when they don't have that PPE as that initial protection equipment.
Okay. Our next question, it is unclear to me if the checks are required weekly or monthly. I have been told both.
The standard...
Let me take that one, because if they're in California, it is monthly. And California is the only state that I'm aware of, and I'll defer to if Brian knows otherwise, in the nation that allows monthly activation of shower and eye washes. Otherwise, it should be weekly. Brian, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so the standard, which is more of a international standard, does state that it has to be weekly. So if there are any local code or enforcement requirements that differ from that, that's certainly possible. Like Mike mentioned with the California thing. So that would be the minimum you would need to follow. There may be some situations where you need to test it more than weekly, and I just want to point that out because sometimes your employees are working around extremely hazardous chemicals all the time. It may be good practice to have them test those things more frequently than weekly, but that is the minimum requirement. Okay.
And the next question is there a max PSI for eye wash stations?
Believe it goes 30 to 90 is the pressure range that the products are tested within. So it's going to perform within the requirements of the standard between that pressure range.
However, the plumbing codes require that the pressure be no greater than 80 psi in potable water systems. So your system should not be delivering anything in excess of 80 psi per the building code.
Okay. This is a rather long one, so this caller or the attendee is from Arizona. We have a chemical lab with multiple Eyewash showers in the building and have one outside building due to work they do outside. It's a combo Eyewash shower. We are experiencing 4 months out of the year temperature reaching 109 degrees. We have a canopy providing shade that puts protection over exposed pipes and installed mixing valve, but still have high temps. What else can we do?
Well, there is the possibility of chillers if you do need to cool the water down, but there are some other solutions out there. There are scald devices which can be placed on the fixture itself, and what that can do is monitor the temperature of the water there at the safety fixture, and if it gets too hot, the scald valve opens up and releases water from the supply line until it cools back down, and the scald device then closes again to stop that flow of water. So at least it would be opening up as whenever that water gets too warm, and you'd have to make provisions on where you want that water to go, but that is a possible solution as well.
The chiller would be probably the best. Arizona, and even with the scald protection valves, because of the radiant heat in the sun after sunset in the evening from hardscapes such as stone, pavements, rocks, whatever, block walls, the temperature will be in excess, and that water will bleed sometimes 24 hours. There are two other solutions I want to add to what Ryan mentioned. One is bury valves, where they can actually bury the piping below ground. The earth is a great insulator, and then that feed comes up out of the ground. And then also there are devices, if there is a wall and an air-conditioned building, a climatized building, then the piping can be located in the climatized building, and then there's rods that penetrate the wall to activate the valves. So the water, any standing water, whatever pressurized water would be in the air-conditioned space. And you'll find that those types of systems available through most of the manufacturers of Eyewash and showers.
And we have one more question. It says, is there a temperature that is too hot?
Well, for the standard, anything over 100
chemical.
Do you have something to add? Like, otherwise, I was going to say the exact temperature you're going to rinse off with can be somewhat dependent upon the chemical. So if you do have an occupational health and safety person that has more knowledge on that certain chemical and the proper temperature to rinse that off, that would be where I would go and reference that to make sure you have the optimal temperature.
Yeah,
all right. Well, that's all the questions we have.
Billy, can I add a clarification?
Oh, certainly. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Mike Adkins. Just one thing, Ryan did a very good job of covering supplemental, but on the drench hoses that are Eyewash drench hoses are acceptable as Eyewashes, and it said on the slide if it meets certain requirements of the standard, if they have a stay open valve and they have 2 Eyewash heads. And I wanted to mention that because many university laboratories have those devices, and I don't want people running back to their facilities department and saying, oh, these are no longer acceptable. If it has the 2 Eyewash heads, if it has a valve that stays open for hands-free operation, yes, it is considered an Eyewash per the standard, meets all the requirements for the standard.
Thank you, Mike. Great point. I had something I was going to mention and I inadvertently forgot, so thank you for bringing that up.
Stage fright.
Well,
you,
we're
Billy.
almost to the top of our hour. We are at our top of the hour now, so I'd like to thank our presenters today. Mike, Ryan, Christine, I thank you very much for taking time out of what I know are your very, very busy schedules, as well as our attendees. Again, the webinar will be the recording of this webinar will be posted on our website within a couple of hours. I do have the slide deck, so if you're interested in getting a copy of that, send me an email. So again, thank you very much. And we have our next webinar coming up will be next week, and it'll be on the earthquake in Anchorage, Alaska. So hopefully I'll see many of you returning. Again, Christine, Mike, Ryan, thank you so much, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Billy.
Bye-bye now.